Welcome, everybody, to the Brooklyn Rail's 73rd Radical Poetry Reading. My name's Anselm Berrigan. I'm the poetry editor of the Rail, and I have the pleasure of being MC today for a reading featuring Benedicta Froelich, Eileen Myles, Trace Peterson, and Andrei Codrescu. The reading's curated by Vincent Katz, and it's in celebration of his recent retrospective publication, Previous Glances, published by Edizioni Galleria Mazzoli. Before we get started with the reading, I just want to say the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter, and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to check the chat for a living document of resources and actions. Over the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has undertaken a miraculous journey, bringing together in a single monthly publication art, music, dance, film, theater, and poetry and fiction, along with thoughtful social and political meditations. As a small nonprofit, the Rail needs your support. Your contributions can directly support the writers, guests, artists, production staff, and operations here at the Rail. Please also check the chat for more information and links to donate. So the Rail's 22 years old. It only was able to legally start drinking last year. And now I'd like to pass the mic to the Rail's own Fong Bui to introduce today's reading.
Thank you, Anselm. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. We're very happy to have you on. Hosting every Wednesday is our nurturing day, really, through poetry. So yes, I just want to say a few words about Vincent. I'd like to start just sort of reminding myself first in that growing up, the first half of my life in Vietnam, it's a small country with 2,000-year history of struggle for independence, As a child, I was taught that we have to fight to preserve our distinct language and culture against all invaders. Of course, it began with the Chinese, and then the Japanese, the French, and then finally the US. You can imagine poetry was inevitably considered the most essential means that can really save the soul of the people, for they can carry with them from place to place. And I remember my home was bombed growing up through the oral tradition, in case books get burned or destroyed. Everyone knows that subversive power of poetry lies in the fact that it can communicate first before it is understood. Poetry is the music of the soul. So growing later half in the US, first at Philadelphia, and then came to New York, where I'd been living since before 1985. I remember feeling so ecstatic in buying all the Huneman books at St. Mark's all at once, including one with Vincent, one with Eileen, and then soon reading the history of cross-pollination between writing and the visual art, among other disciplines, being the hallmark of the New York school. And soon I discovered there's a continuum that's been kept, preserved for its hard-won freedom. There's a direct continuation from one generation to the next, beginning with Ashbery, John Ashbery, Barbara Gass, James Schuyler, Kenneth Coach, O'Hara, Ted Berrigan, Anna Snotley, to Bill Bergson, John Pass, among others, to Vincent, to Andre, to Eileen, to Anselm, to Trace, to Benedicta. Today, we get to celebrate Vincent's exquisite publication. I have my hand here. Previous Glances, with the sublime illustration by his old friend and collaborator, the great artist Francesco Clemente, published by Edizioni Galleria Mazzoli, by the legend gallery is named Emilio Mazzoli, who I met once, who's known for showing American artists such as Peter Haley, Ross Blackner, Robert Longo, among other, along with of course, a lot of great Italian artists, Sandro, Carlo Bonavetto, and others. And in a way, I love the size of the book because it's just a little bit bigger than J.M. Dent's Every Man's Library book series, which I grew up in Vietnam with reading. When I think of Vincent now as a poet, I think of his subtle alertness to everything surrounding, be it ancient texts, be it works of art, poetry, old and new, be it CDs, old and new, be it the street, old and new, and so on. Pretty much a total embodiment of who Vincent is as a person. Vincent's poetry, I would say, is a personification of the philosophy of Black Mountain College, which is the rail. Pretty much carry on Vincent's back with tremendous labor, yet always shown through such effortlessness. Don't know how he does it. In any rate, I often get a sense when I read Vincent's poems, as I did last night, they seem to be generated from his feet, then get quickly traveling upward to his legs, to his pelvis, his torso, then through the neck, and get to his head for some revisions or not. you feel that some poem was written super fast. For some, for the moment though, I think Vincent as what Lao Tzu once remarked, a good traveler has no fixed plans and is not intent on arriving. I adore Vincent's journey. As they say in Italian, che festeggiamenti abbiano inizio. So we can't wait for this celebration. Back to you and welcome to this celebration, Vincenzo.
Tante grazie, Fong. Thank you so much. And you figured me out. You figured out how I write poems for my feet. I never thought about that before, but that's actually true. The head, yeah, should be the last thing involved, I guess. Thank you so much to everyone. Thanks to the Brooklyn Rail. This is I noticed the 496th NSE presentation. So we're there. That's incredible what you've been doing and doing these weekly Zooms 5 times a week, keeping us going during the pandemic and beyond. So thank you so much to Fong, to Nick, to Anselm, the whole team at the Rail. Really appreciate that. And thank you, of course, to the great poets and translator who have joined me today. Translator is Benedicta Froelich, and the poets joining are Eileen Myles, Trace Peterson, and Andrei Codrescu. I'll say a bit about them in a moment. I just want to talk about this book for a minute. Fong showed it to you, the cover, and also just want to show you something of the inside. These are some works on paper by Francesco Clemente from the early 1980s, 1981 probably. And very nicely reproduced in this book. I won't show you all, but just a couple more. And this one I like a lot. Can you see that? Yeah, so it's a pleasure to have this work in here by Francesco. Francesco's somebody, as Fong mentioned, that I've been able to work with, had the honor of working with on several occasions. I've written about his work and done some collaborations with him over the years. Anyhow, this book came about through Emilio Mazzoli and also with the help of the poet and publisher Richard Malazzo and critic. And so Emilio wanted to do a book of poems. Publishes a series of poems of books of poetry, and he gives a poetry prize. So he's somebody who, for whom poetry is essential. And I had been kind of looking through my, like, trying to figure out what I had done in my life in terms of poetry. So I had all these poems, and I thought, well, why don't we make a selection, like going back to when I was a teenager up to the present? And I kept narrowing it down and narrowing it down, narrowing it down. And finally I said, I can't do this anymore. And I just sent it to Emilio, and I figured they'd get back to me saying like, well, this is like 3 times too long. You have to keep cutting it down. But instead they sent it to poor Benedicta. And the next thing I got was the whole thing translated into Italian. And I'm able to read Italian, and I started to read it, and I was really blown away. And I showed it to Francesco, and he said, yeah, this is an incredible translation. He knows my poetry really well. And so I have read every poem in this book in Italian, and we ended up working together on it a little bit, but mainly it was all done by her already before I read it. And reading these poems in Italian, I finally said to her at one point, you know, some of these poems are actually better in Italian. I mean, she did such an incredible job. It's hard to explain unless you can read both languages, but she did this amazing work, which we'll talk about what that means, what translation means a little bit later. But now, yeah, we want to get to the reading and presentation, and I just want to speak briefly about each of the other 3 presenters who are all very important to me. Eileen, as we all know, is an amazing artist and critic and activist, and someone who's so important in all of our lives. But I'd also like to highlight another aspect of theirs, which is that they are an amazing supporter of other artists, and particularly poets. And so this is a book that I did in 1990 with Rudy Burkhart, the photographer, photo of us on the back. And at that time, I asked Eileen if she would write something for it, and they sent me a letter from which I extracted some comments that I'd like to read here. They talked about the poems that they liked, and then they wrote, I like these unequivocally because they simply get out there and do it. New York hello with a snap, sullen intrusion mysteriously. Poem might be the best poem in the book, uncluttered and profound in its limitation. And Channel uses just that light aerial touch Katz has with cities, urban landscapes, on words, their silly surfaces. All in all, Vincent Katz is a fog or essence poet rather than human. The city thing, an overview, he does quite naturally, most endearingly with New York, but also quite competently with pluggy Boston and more horizontal Chicago. His classicism is not to be missed, plus the almost boundedness of modern things, the poem that ends with shiny cassettes. One of the most amazingly detached attitudes towards youth I've seen in anyone's poems. It seems kind of useless to him, like when he looks at the dirty glasses in the apartment, it feels like furniture. But New York hello is very young in the best sense of the word. It's something you can be young against. Yeah, so that is pretty meaningful to me. Thank you, Eileen. Andrei Codrescu is somebody I've known for a long time, but not, we didn't really get to interact personally because he was living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and New Orleans too, I think, and working and teaching and traveling. I would see him occasionally when he came to New York to do a reading, but we didn't get to hang out so much. But we did communicate a lot, and I knew him mainly in those days in the 1980s as the editor of a journal called Exquisite Corpse, which was very important to me and others. And I had some poems published in it, and also a couple of prose pieces. One that I wrote about carnival in Rio de Janeiro, not the big official carnival, but kind of street parades that are these sort of surrealistic events that pop up. And then I wrote another piece for Exquisite Corpse on a festival of Fellini's films that was held at the Film Forum called Tutto Fellini. And I just want to read the last line from that article because it seems kind of relevant today. It's kind of how everyone had grown up seeing these films, and now they were all old together. And it ends, what had once seemed garrulous inconsequence turned out to be the human condition. And finally, I'd like to say a word about Trace Peterson, who will be joining us soon. So I've known Trace for many years. I knew her pre-transition, and I think she was living in Boston, and then she moved to New York, and we met up. We almost had like a formal meeting. I think we met in the lobby of a hotel, of the Ace Hotel, for some reason, and we, and she kind of checked me out in the sense of like, like politically, I think, for some reason. I don't know. This happened to me like once or twice in my life where, and actually it was both around the same time, and it was both the same question. It was like, so what do you think of George Bush? As though I was going to say, oh, Bush is great. I'm a huge fan. Like he's really the guy for me. Anyhow, after we got by that, we realized that, wow, we had a lot in common, and it was just kind of, we like a lot of the same poetry, and we have this way of talking about it that is just like, we both get very enthusiastic. So one thing led to another, and we decided to try to do these panel discussions on poetry, which we did for a while. So we're kind of like in the trenches doing that. It was called Quips and Cranks, which is a line from a John Milton poem. We did one on music and poetry. We did one on, environmental crisis. They were good. They were done at SVA for, a year or so. Anyhow, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about these three presenters and some of my connections to them. And now we'll get going with the event itself. So I think I will turn it back over to Anselm. Thank you.
Thanks, Vincent. It's gonna be hard for me not to ask you what you think of George Bush every time I see you from now on, I think. The first reader is going to be Andrei Codrescu. Andrei was born in Sibiu, which is in the Transylvania region of Romania. And it was a town where all the roofs of the buildings have eyeballs. He immigrated to the United States in 1966. He's the author of tons of books, poems, novels, essays. He founded Exquisite Corpse, a journal of books and ideas, and was a regular commentator on NPR's All Things Considered. And he taught literature and poetry in Baltimore and in Louisiana variously. And please welcome Andrei.
Thank you, Anselm. Yeah, I just was muted. When Vincent generously offered his body of work for entire decades, I thought at first, what a clever idea. We'll all have to now read the entire book to find out what resonates with us for whatever reason, and look at his previous glances to see to what extent they are our glances now.
Wait, sorry, Andrei, may I interrupt you? I forgot to say that this reading will be presented in chronological order. So the readers will each be going through the book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you're starting with the earliest days.
You are right. Yeah, to see what decades. Well, to me, it was a critical meditation because I kept thinking, well, I hesitated between Vincent, the young poet in the 70s and 80s, because I was a fairly young poet myself in those years. And we had both in many ways got our juju from the second generation New York school and learned much from our chef d'école, the eminence grise, Ted Bergen. Hi, Ansel.
Totally.
I didn't know Vincent in the 70s and 80s, but we had entwined roots. Now in the second decade of the 21st century, I know Vincent, he's a friend. We collaborated for 16 months during the pandemic on an epic poem, a book-length poem called A Possible Epic of Care. And I still find our beginnings as if no time had passed. They are live. So I chose the 70s and the 80s because I'm still intrigued by the power and range of those beginnings. So this is a fairly small selection that you allowed into the book, but they are significant, I think, because they have some of your ongoing interests and people in them. And Rudy's movie is the first poem, written on May 25, 1978, in Haiti. And as you told me the backstory, you may want to tell it, I won't.
It wasn't written in Haiti, it's about a Rudy Burkhart movie about Haiti.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah.
Rudy's movie. There are no secrets in Haiti, and the puddles are immense. Streets, chevron, your eyes, lattice in Morocco, where it is dangerous to see for more than a few feet. My feet are always wet when the sirocco blows, flowers yellow to the edge of the field where the ocean begins. To what? Could it be a minute? You suggest with your suggestive eyes irrigatorial banks to settle on for the long days ahead. Bulges, the dishwasher's electricity, temporary, if at all, executrix of your most secret thoughts. I truly like that poem. And I had to rehearse it because executrix is a hard word to say. The next poem is written in the spring of 1980 in Chicago, and this is probably when you were doing your classical studies because it has Latin in it. Evening Blossoms. It is better to sink than to think. Such moments of morning profundity unattended come. Here lie the remains of last night's battle on my desk. Stones, fruit trees, and escili septem quae supersunt tragedias. How difficult to survive in a blanket air, cluttered with the sentiment of others, automobiles and the fingers twinkling, curling around the drumstick or curled around by a golden ring, sparkling in sapphire. That glowing stone, the fire of Sappho, reclining in her lesbian glade. Oh, to you, singer, and to delicate Horace, pacing his Sabine estate, I dedicate my heart this moment. If it is mine to give, for the shadows of the supermarket and the reclining armchair press indissolubly at my sides, and up in the sky, the bird of destruction bears its pearly talons. Ancient harmony of those islands flows even into this present day through electrical contrivance, into the voices of young women and men of Motown, their eyes filled with desperate visions of the old world, and ours fixed on this street of age and dismay. Why have you changed toward me? You're acting strange toward me. But that fire cannot be ignored, which flames up in the evening, and by morning has spent its tender bloom. leaving the traveler bent from exhaustion, yet somehow elated beyond belief. And the next work I focused on is called Memorial Day, which seems to be a tradition in the New York School of writing the Memorial Day poem. I don't know when that became, but it seems to be the New York School holiday. Memorial Day, written 1980, I think, 81. I want to call you so bad. It's not Memorial Day, but there is something I want you to remember, to not be vicarious, gulping the sudden thought of city, arms empty. You just called. Everything you said went straight to my head. Trashy film clip is all there is left to look at in the soot sullen noon. And spoons. I remember your neck gurgling certainties, surrounded my glossy eyes, fastened to your white heels. Today, sitting on the grass next door to the reception, I saw her today at the fountain plains. Are you single? She rims the crevasse, radiate obesely in the Saturn pattern of frozen keys. I remember your fingernails today, bright pink. Oh, I'm on fire. One of those nights, the luxury of you, a phone call away. Tomorrow, I prefer bicycles to cars. Ears I'd like to kiss. Billy took 2 of the 4 Tylenol he gave me for my birthday. You just dropped in to leave your bag and go on to a party. I have to put things in boxes. It says ciao on it, like I always say when I leave your house. You look so good one of the nights you feel like. I remember your eyes. You just called again from the party to say you're bored, I think. There is a nice song on the Soul Station. I've almost got everything in boxes. I have to get my sheets in a minute, and I've got to finish this, and I'll be dressed when you come. And that's a love poem, I suppose, just like the next one. If youth is anywhere, it's in these poems, for sure. Flower, you are the magic flower inside the glass of my heart, easing towards solutions of things not known to need solving. But, you know, the mysterious nuts, seaweed that confuse our plan, the necessity of killing a large insect because it is in your room. You touch and all is pure. There is so much light in your smile and dark. You are the medium and the maximum. I want to scream, to make all the others disappear or turn into a backdrop, alone. No objects, maybe just a bed. But can you stand me? My musician's habits and needs, because your life is so good, I need to be near it a lot. You answered all my questions and gave me bigger questions. Mm-hmm. So these are lovely poems. And, you know, I myself didn't have such a great time in those years. Actually, I was living in California and things, all my friends were dying, crashing into trees and taking too many drugs. But my feelings were in the same zone and range, you know, passionate.
Thanks.
So thank you. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrei.
Yeah.
So next we'll have Eileen Myles. Eileen came to New York from Boston in 1974 to be a poet. Their books include For Now, an essay/talk about writing, I Must Be Living Twice, New and Selected Poems, and Chelsea Girls. They showed their photographs in 2019 at Bridget Donahue in New York City. Eileen's received a Guggenheim Fellowship and an award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. They live in New York and Marfa, Texas. Please welcome Eileen Myles.
Thank you, Anselm, and thank you, everybody. It's so great to be here. And I have to right away say, I too have a Memorial Day poem, and it's "Cat jumps into a dumpster shopping." Thank you for giving me a chance. And I just already, I mean, like what Fong said right at the beginning, I adore Vincent's journey is such a sweet and true thing to say about this book and even this event. And what Vincent was saying about Italian, I think Italian sits in a funny place for a lot of us. And I know for myself, when I was putting a selected together and felt entirely clueless, when an Italian poet came forward and said she was doing an anthology of American women poets in Italian, and could I send her some poems, that was the way my selected started, because I knew right away which poems of mine I wanted to have in Italian, and they were the best poems. It was just like the thought of being transformed into Italian was in some way my idea of beauty, or my idea of the nextness of translation. So it's so cool that you're selected is just in Italian, Vincent. And so I've got 4 poems to read, and I did take these sort of, and also thank you for reading that. I totally forgot that passage I wrote about you and Rudy's book, and it was really fun and moving to hear. But I've got a lot of sort of some criticism on the hoof, so I'm going to read the poem and my notes and try and keep my eye on the time so I don't yak too much. And so I'm pretty excited to hear these babies out loud. Vincent's poems are spiffy, well packed, like someone who really knows how to travel. I've always meant to read Tennyson, but in a way, Vincent, in this poem I'm going to read, he indulges in his own knowing unknowing, and he holds Tennyson in our world, not his world, in a way that's only tribute. So I'll read the poem, and I have a couple more things to say. So it's called Ode to Tennyson on Stamford Platform. I hold in my hand selected poems of Alfred Lord Tennyson, a life's work, the studying, not the writing. Induced other modes, as prefabs, this is my favorite line in the poem, as prefabs flare below. One can't pretend to divine what gatherings, gardens, soirees, lectures, readings, debates all encountered with a sense of life's path proceeding smoothly according to predesigned plan, as one would look down from a plane arriving in Mexico City and see a quite different array of buildings, pools, arenas than in JFK. Words flowed from his mouth, proud gold. He spent pondering a weekend's curve, or rankled at the intimation of unbidden glory. Insistent, is it? Lanky high jumpers high their course. Another great line. Lanky jumpers high their course. I had to go look up high. Speed, it just means go fast, right? Well, this is so Vincent, in doleful disarray, sing patterned happenstance of bridges, hazes, tree cover, greenified spire, Stamford Plaza, waste heap, car park, crane ballet, human hair, locked bikes, and all supremely irrelevant to man on Stamford platform. Sunglass, tie, white short sleeve shirt, paunch, parading briefcase, or a more sultry type, blue t-shirt leans on fence. I mean, I think Vincent is kind of king of the list, and I think the book, that poem is sort of luxuriating in all these comparisons, like Vincent and Tennyson and Now and Then. And the second stanza is flawless. It's a pure love of stuff on the pedestrian micro distance. And again, at the end, there's a comparison between these two dudes, because it is Vincent and Tennyson, and one with a paunch and the other, the poem ends cruisy, on earth, sultry. Wow. And so the next poem I'm going to read is called Full Moon in Mexico, Full Moon in New York. And again, I think that the title, which is like two-tiered, is really cool, because it's it winks at Mexico's colonial past, when titles of poems were like 6 or 7 lines long and honorific. Vincent is always a tad regal, and that's his joke. Plus he's weary, though he always cleans his house. And here's the poem. New York still has its moments, despite they razed our house of dreams, took part of the city's history, representing its most fervid, wayward, unrefined imaginings, postures wedded to a wall, took all that and cavalierly, without discussion, removed it. Where did they put all those bricks, not to mention sighs, gasps of ecstasy, disappointment? It bodes ill for the city. And I love, I'll say this more later. It bodes ill for the city when a temple devoted to Pallas Athena is summarily destroyed. They determined a blight had come upon the city, but what of us who do not agree? Savage rains will fall, the winds and oceans collect their outrage and heap it upon the sanitized, overblown citadel. For many musicians had blessed the place, and artists, Santana and Clementi, was how we lived our lives, and no one seemed to mind, but Rudy still loves Times Square, and we have to live our lives this morning. The April light shone brightly, and a huge pit bull approached. I held my little dog to the side, but she was so full of love. She jumped and then crouched down, lay there so he wouldn't be afraid, and other people went to work, and the city continues, regardless. The vagaries of government, benighted public servants who serve only industry. Humanity can never be severed from that root of life. And for that, Pallas Athena forgives us, knowing it was not we destroyed her temple, and she'll build us another, lighter, higher, and more durable than any man. And that's 1999. And I like that he's mourning the loss of something here. Vincent, as a true New Yorker, despises what they call urban renewal, and we are never allowed a classical past. Smash. New York is Buddhist. All times are one. I love he allies nature with our disdain and loves art and the locations of it. A small dog's submission is a nod to the big dog's fear. There's philosophy in that. And the poem ends in the soft light of a classical, I can't read that word. And I thank Vincent for that. And my next poem is got a great title, which again I had to look up on my phone, my late phone. It's called Queen of Pannonia. And actually, Pannonia is like the Roman Empire name of Budapest, where he wrote this poem in 1991. Has a great first line. I vomited on the Argentinianstrasse, racked with bullet pain to the head. So I guess this is a hangover poem. But now on Andrassy Ut, everything is clear in the huge trees and traffic scaled like Paris, waiting for Madame Butterfly, huge iron wrought entrances, decayed landing, and a young woman has brought us roses through the streets we live with her husband in a tiny village. The river's massive energy uplifts parliaments and bridges in her honor. Many people walk her streets, but only she is resplendent, replete with lavish furniture, high ceiling windows, branch motif. We walk past Liszt's home and Bartók's, and the school Liszt founded, his pounding practice infuriated neighbors. A man cuts roses in the evening from a field to sell the next morning in the city, but at that time we will be sleeping on a train to another city. We take everything she has given us and put it in our poetry, our film, for there is only one queen of Pannonia, and she is more strange than salt. It was like a great last line. I picked it for the puking and the Roman Empire. And I say more here, but I want to be swift. The last stanza makes and breaks the poem. There's the rapid transition from the man in the field and his flowers to the city and the us on the speeding away with the magical, strangely hermetic last line. There is only one queen of Pannonia, and she is more strange than salt. And here is, could this be my last poem? Yeah, I think so. Nothing got away. Yeah, and the last poem is I guess probably my faves because it's little and perfect. And I'll read the poem and I'll read the full thing, which is not so long that I wrote about it. But it's called Valencia, and written in Valencia in 1998. I love Sundays in Europe. You know me by my face. Everyone congregates. It happens to be at church, but could as easily be a bar. Light shoots to sky clear as a gunshot, edifices plain as the look of a breast or hip. We all sit together as the priest intones. Space is not really air that separates molecules. Clinging to thought branch over and under cities latent abundance. Some friends have got off the train and are not present. You walk in any direction and the street's curve leads you past indiscretion into unity with the calm pedigree of belonging here. Wow. And so it's the first one I chose, and how I knew I wanted Vincent's 90s. It's almost, like all good poems, it's almost impossible to explain, because what happened outside of the poem, an enormity, clearly, and death is invoked. So there's a choky grandeur that exudes peace and makes the poet at home in the world in a way he understands. You know me by my face, and shares. Thank you, Vincent.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful.
Thanks, Eileen. So next, we're going to have Trace Peterson read. Trace is a poet and literary scholar. She's the author of Since I Moved In. It was published by Chax Books in 2019. And also the co-editor of Arrive on Wave, collected poems of Gil Ott and Troubling the Line, trans and genderqueer poetry and poetics. She edits and publishes EOAGH, which I may have mispronounced. It's spelled EOAGH, a journal and small press, which has won 2 Lambda Literary Awards and a National Jewish Book Award. Recent poems of Trace's have appeared or are forthcoming in Interim Poetry and Poetics, Michigan Quarterly Reviews, MQR Mixtape, and Poets.org. She is currently the NEH Postdoctoral Fellow in Poetics at Emory University. Please welcome Trace Peterson.
Okay, hi everybody. It's really an honor to be here and to celebrate Vincent's book. I've been a longtime fan of Vincent's work, and I feel that I'm here equally sort of as a fan of Vincent and as a friend. Vincent, Vincent and I curated a series that I thought was quite successful in New York called Quips and Cranks. And I think I was probably Cranks. I think he might have been Quips and I was Crank. I'm not sure which of us was which, but anyway, we've continued talking since then and about poetics. Although I'm not actually capable of doing the kind of brilliant commentary, contextualizing things that Eileen does, because I don't have this kind of view into Vincent's poetic process. So I'm just going to say that what I'm reading this is a product of a collaboration. I sent Vincent my favorite poems from the decade, and he said, read these ones out of, he chose some of the poems from what I chose. So this is sort of a combination of sensibilities here. And my tastes tend toward the interruptive. So here it goes. Yeah. And I again, I can't do Eileen's brand of useful commentary, but I'm going to read and let the poems speak for themselves. Okay, so Air to Yvonne. It floats, or you do, up where size is. Doesn't do anything. A blurred cloud. Later, perfect pink. Over pond, you sink. A moment fails. You are there, too. High, you fall. Over sights abandon. Prism in weather. Above in seasons. For one, for again. Raleigh night to Bob. 1. Back to England to fit as misfit. Scraps in trash. Mini disco ball music's acceptable rush. 2. Could never work in the long run. Tonight, so perfect. The queer reality of it, gentleness. Library, Friday, 3 days later. After 2 days, heavy depression came a biblical rain, bomb-like thundered out the city. They had flown away to heaven, perhaps. The dead are dead and the living breathe. Faces on street contain a knowledge, the will to go on undominated. But the heaviness weighed so I couldn't enjoy my 2 sons. Though I did sit with them and listen. Afternoon sun light broke through. Could that be? A book of artists' conversations, the desire to discuss, differ even. Suddenly lifted the moral cloud they too lived under. What is important is the desire to understand, to speak and let the difference stand. And I just think that's so beautiful. Suddenly lifted the moral cloud they lived under. They too lived under. With. A breath is of time, a wasting, near to one, seated and placated. Foreign ministry, divine mystery, said it could appeal across. A divided fence, a hunch about giving up, too much freshness. Somber again, tuned out too much. Friends buckle at winter's gate. This one, this is one of a couple poems in the book that are kind of projective in their formal arrangement. So that's what you're hearing. Gone. The bright on that lift. And dragons, are those dragons? They are, if you say they are, and flag, got to be careful about flags. Flying out to the blocks. Peninsula's sun. Her flesh hit by in city, smacked, but not those buildings. They've no scale. Thought. Sitting at a metal table in Bryant Park, the air is light and warm and the space is enclosed. By buildings, it is the air temple denizens await. The light takes certain sectors of buildings to bathe. The restaurant behind the library stands out silent, with bird screech weighing official sculpture. Psychological dump trucks carry you inside, where your pieces distribute aimlessly to weary readers, eyes glazed from too much push, too little air. It's all fine if you don't think of your children, but if you do, you can think of other things as well. You have some control over your mind. And in this poem, I see there's this beautiful O'Hara-like gesture, but it's psychological dump trucks. I think that's like an interesting adaptation of psychological dump trucks carry you inside. It's like that a poem about the equestrian. I feel some echo of you're moving around in urban spaces. Moment. I don't know, there's 2 names in capital letters in this poem, so I'm just going to read them as, I'm going to read the letters out loud. I don't know if that's incorrect. I might sound like a cheerleader, we'll see. Moment. The style is sex. Touch football games with my friends, and suddenly I'm happy. This is who I was and am. PAULFRANK. You see a woman get into a taxi. New York is still open, still, unscripted. Denver. That's outside, it's not a hallway. Now we're happy inside this La Quinta. That's how the rhyme goes. Now we're talking outside. The big city, the ballpark lit up at night, highways endless hustle, trains lumbering through downtown. City where great writers ground down dirt and lay, tipped mirror tells the story, tall and beveled, precarious.
Thank you. The poem you read, Library, was a 9/11 poem. I don't know if that was clear.
Fantastic. No, that totally makes sense. Yeah.
There was that, yeah, just this incredible downpour afterwards that sort of like took everything away.
That's fascinating. I was looking for the 9/11 poem. I didn't realize that one was it. That's wonderful. Vincent, do you have anything else to say about any of the other choices? I'd be curious. Who's Bob in Raleigh Night?
Bob Creeley. I was actually down in Raleigh for a week researching Black Mountain College, and I was just kind of soaking in the physical atmosphere, but also kind of like, I guess, going out at night to some place that seemed very empty and quiet. It had a disco ball, but like there was no disco happening. So it's kind of these sort of muted lines that I felt from the place, not from him so much, but I just wanted to share it with him.
I'm getting a lot of sort of queerness from these poems that we selected. Am I projecting or imagining that, or to what extent is that?
I mean, if you're getting it, it's there.
Great, good.
I mean, I'm glad that you read that poem that has that line, the queer reality of it, gentleness. It's just like, I don't know. I don't think anything needs to be said or explained. But yeah, no, I think you're right.
Thank you, Trace. So I think now Benedicta and Vincent are going to read together. And so I'll introduce them both. Benedicta Froelich is a novelist, journalist, translator, and interpreter. History in the English-speaking world and its language have always been her main passions, together with the art of storytelling. After starting out as a cartoonist and publishing 2 books for children and young adults, she left for Scotland and majored in Scottish history, and then devoted herself to historical and biographical novels. Her most recent novels are Nella sua quiete from 2014 about T.E. Lawrence, and L'Indicibile Inverno 2020 about Captain Scott's expedition to the Antarctic. She currently lives in Switzerland. And Vincent Katz is a poet, translator, and hybrid form prose writer, author of the poetry collections Broadway for Paul, Southness, Swimming Home, and the book of translations, The Complete Elegy of Sextus Propertius. His writing on contemporary art and poetry has appeared in Art in America, the Brooklyn Rail, and the Poetry Project newsletter. As curator of the Readings in Contemporary Poetry series at Dia Chelsea from 2010 to 2021, Katz edited the anthology Readings in Contemporary Poetry, which came out in 2017. Last year, he collaborated on an opera with composer Sarah Sarhandi, and he lives in New York City. Please welcome Benedicta and Vincent.
Thank you, Anselm. I see a note in the chat from Billy Chernikov, like, what is the name of the book? So the name of the book is Previous Glances, and it has a subtitle, An Intense Togetherness. So I think it was, for me, that was like the two things. The previous glance is like glancing back in time because this is a retrospective, but an intense togetherness is like the moment which could have happened in the past, but is actually always happening now. So I feel like, and this book was put together during this time of pandemic, but also time of, I feel, you know, a certain strengthened connectedness between or among certain people. So it's Previous Glances and Intense Togetherness, published by Edizioni Galleria Mazzoli, and I'm very happy to have this conversation with Benedicta. Hi, Benedicta.
Hi, thanks for having me, and thanks for all the wonderful things you said about my translation earlier. I'm really, really touched by that. Thank you so much.
Of course. Well, you're going to hear more, so get ready. We're going to, yeah, we want to talk a little bit about this translation process, and then we'll read a short selection of poems back and forth. I'll read the English, and Benedicta will read her translation. But I wanted to invite our other panelists if they want to jump in with a question for Benedicta as well. But I wanted to start by asking you, you told me something interesting, which was that you went through the book, I think in order, like in sequence, and translated everything. And then you went back to the beginning and reworked it. Could you talk a little bit about like what happened when you went back to the beginning? Did you completely rework, or did you just tweak, or what was that like?
Well, the very interesting thing here is that this was a very peculiar book for me to translate, and very challenging in many ways, because it covers such a long time span. It's practically 40 years of poetry. So it's your whole story in a way. And what is particularly interesting is that you can see the evolution of your poetry throughout it, but also you have many different voices, because there are moments when you are experimenting with different languages or different styles, different ideas. And so what I felt like I really needed to do is, I needed to enter your world in a way, meaning that I needed to familiarize myself with your voice as a poet and as an artist. So what I did is that first I approached the book by reading throughout it from beginning to end. And as you rightly pointed out, by translating the poems in the original sequence, in the chronological order in which they are presented in the book. And then what happened was that when I finished, I went back at the very beginning and started over and revising all my translations. And by then it was different, because I felt that I had, by then I had the feel of your voice. I felt like I was getting into it. And also there was this very peculiar thing, very emotional, because most of these poems are like snapshots of your life. So it was like following your whole life in a way. And some of the poems were very intense from an emotional point of view, meaning that I could feel that they were memories first and foremost. And so I felt like I was looking at your whole life, and I really had to understand every stage of your life in a way. So when I went back to the beginning and started over, I felt like I knew you by then in a way. So it was different, and I made lots of corrections, and I upgraded my translations in a way, and they felt a lot better the second time around. And then, of course, I was very lucky to have the opportunity to interact with you as the author, because this doesn't always happen to a translator, you know. So this was very, very lucky for me.
Well, we did communicate a little bit because I'm able to read it, and I had some comments, but really it was all done before, where there was just like a couple of things that needed to be tweaked that were details. But I wanted to ask you, how long did that process take? Like, I don't know, maybe the first time through and the second time through, approximately, like how long did that take you?
Oh, well, I have to say that I kind of took my time, meaning that I approached the work very carefully. Right. Because it was a bit intimidating at first, because it's a very long book.
Almost 200 pages.
Exactly.
200 pages.
So I think that the first translation took around a couple of months, 2 months and a half, 3 months. And then the second translation was obviously a bit quicker, because I already had a basis, to work on. But I wanted to take my time, because it was an important work. Obviously, it's a lifetime's work, so.
Could you talk a little bit about, we were talking the other day about how translation is a way of seeing a work. I mean, in a way, it's kind of like a form of criticism or a form of biography. can you talk a little bit about that? Like how, and especially something like this, which as you said, covers a lot of different time periods and stylistic shifts. I mean, when you you've translated a lot, actually. You've translated poetry and prose. When you're translating something, how much are you thinking about your own interpretation, so to speak, or your own, you know, what you are bringing to, let's say, an Italian reader of this work? Like, how do you conceptualize your role?
Well, of course, translating poetry is very intimidating when compared to translating prose, because you're entering a very slippery territory here,
Yeah.
Meaning that you already know as a translator that you will have to make choices and compromises, and you are terrified of betraying the original text. So in the beginning, I wouldn't want to sound over dramatic, but you are really very much aware of the dangers when you're approaching poetry as a translator. And the thing is that the main challenge is the fact that there's a rhythm and there's a sound to it. And of course, when you know, in the passage from one language to another, something is bound to get lost. So you need to prioritize. There's the temptation of obviously being very faithful to the literal meaning of the text. But at the same time, there's also a problem with the sound and the rhythm of the poem. So you are constantly torn between these two extremes. And also, as you pointed out, there's a problem of interpretation. Because, for example, for me, translating your own poetry was very, very instructive, very important, because it presented some peculiar challenges. And there were some instances where there were doubts for me with regards to the interpretation of a verse or a stanza. And I could only hope that the way I felt it, that my, you know, my meaning was the same as yours. So that's why after the first draft was completed, it was so important to be able to interact with you, because I could actually verify this.
Right. Well, I feel like that one of the really hard things is that, sorry, there's a little bit of sound from my radiator, but one of the hard things is that there are multiple meanings in poetry, and that's one of the things we like about it so much. And we have to kind of sacrifice those particular multiple meanings because they can't be translated literally. But hopefully when one is doing a translation, it arrives at something which is a work of, if it's poetry, a work of art in its own right. And it has, you know, a similar sense of the syntax and the, you know, multiple meanings and the referentiality. But honestly, to cover that much time period, I know this is a real challenge for the translator, because you had to go through things that seem almost, you know, like prose, to others that are like syntax is thrown out the window, and you just really seamlessly navigate that in this translation. It's a really beautiful work that you've done.
Thanks.
And I'm getting some notes in the chat that people are looking up a link, and unfortunately there is no link to purchase this book. There's a very limited edition of only 300 copies, which is another reason why we're so happy and grateful to be able to do this event, to let more people know about it. If somebody wants to get a copy, they can write to Mazzoli Gallery, which is, I'll post it in the chat. I think it's info@galleriamazzoli.com. But I think we should move on to our reading now, Benedicta, if that's
Sure.
okay with you. And yeah, so as I said, we have a short selection of poems. These are from the 2010s. Now we're getting up towards the present. We started in 1978 with Andrei, and we're going to end up close to the present. So I'll read the poem in English, and then Benedicta will read her translation in Italian. Roma. I will stay in touch. I want you to know that and take it to heart when you plan your journeys across the seas. You did the right thing. You decided to stay. The rest of us merely visited, promised ourselves to stay, then moved on. And the way to proceed is clear, and the day is ample. It waits to be filled. Lights and shadows on the rooftop opposite. Cicadas begin their cadence in opposition to the ceaseless flux of cars. Trees send up tips to meet the cloudless blue cover. There is a way to all that. If I could have a few minutes, I could think of a way to explain it to myself. Then I could go on, renewed in the explication. In the meantime, there's blue sky, green leaves, stones beneath your feet, the sounds of birds and cars. I will have a way of figuring this out, even if I can't find it now. It will come from the heart, for sure, and knowing I belong in this place. I will see these things I see at last, or not, but I will find a way to work. It's July 1st to 14th, 2014, Rome.
Roma. Mi terrò in contatto. Voglio che tu lo sappia e lo prenda a cuore quando pianificherai i tuoi viaggi attraverso i mari. Hai fatto la cosa giusta, hai deciso di restare. Noi altri abbiamo semplicemente visitato, ci siamo ripromessi di restare, poi si è proseguito. E il modo di procedere è chiaro e la giornata è ampia. Aspetta ad essere riempita. Luci ed ombre sul tetto di fronte, le cicale danno accio alla loro cadenza in opposizione al flusso incessante delle automobili. Gli alberi mandano verso l'alto suggerimenti per incontrare il manto blu, privo di nuvole. C'è un modo per arrivare a tutto ciò. Se potessi avere qualche minuto, potrei pensare a un modo di spiegarlo a me stesso. Allora potrei andare avanti, rinnovato dalla spiegazione. Nel frattempo ci sono cielo azzurro, foglie verdi, sassi sotto i tuoi piedi, il suono d'uccelli e automobili. Avrò modo di capire tutto ciò, anche se ora non riesco a trovarlo. Verrà certamente dal cuore, e sapendo che appartengo a questo luogo, vedrò queste cose che infine vedo ora. O forse no, ma troverò il modo di lavorare.
Being and time. We'll never have a chance like this again. We will, but it will be different. They make it home safely through the guideposts in a small skiff, unaware of the majestic occurrences above them. Two herons fly north, first one, then the other, the most extravagant of evening's descents. The storm has been disrupted, degraded by land masses that have borne its brunt. One wonders as to the extent of their disruptions. A lot of it is what comes across your path. If you are a lizard and a rat snake happens on you, you might get eaten. But you don't really know that. You just react. That's from August and early September of 2015 at Captiva Island in Florida.
L'essere e il tempo. Mai più avremo una simile possibilità. L'avremo, ma sarà cosa diversa. Tornano a casa sani e salvi lungo i cartelli stradali in una piccola barca, ignari degli eventi maestosi al di sopra di loro. Due aironi volano verso nord, prima l'uno, poi l'altro, la più stravagante delle discese serali. La tempesta è stata interrotta, degradata dalle masse continentali che ne hanno sopportato il peso. Ci si chiede l'entità delle loro interruzioni. Molto di tutto ciò è quel che incontri sul tuo cammino. Se sei una lucertola e ti capita un serpente del grano, potresti essere mangiato, ma in verità non lo sai, semplicemente reagisci.
The river's voices, the silent voices of the river. I guess if that's the way it's going to be, then I'm good at that. Near the equator, the sun looks different, but I am no closer to knowing anything. Only here is the silence. That is delicious. It's so great to be on this water, which is not the ocean, so far into the center. And now I am far from everything, far from shore. The only sound, the low hum of the motor, sunset song of detritus, limbed causation in bundles, floating happiness to ones who know time. But time to denizens is sound and air. They wait to open mouths. That was March 21st, 2016 in the Amazon.
Le voci del fiume, le silenziose voci del fiume. Credo che se questo è il modo in cui deve essere, allora può andar bene per me. Vicino all'equatore il sole appare diverso, ma non sono più vicino a sapere qualcosa. Qui c'è silenzio, è delizioso. È così bello essere in quest'acqua che non è l'oceano, così lontano da ogni cosa, lontano dalla riva. Unico suono, il sommesso ronzio del motore, la canzone del tramonto dei detriti, tratteggiata a causa in insiemi che portano una fluttuante felicità a coloro che conoscono il tempo. Ma per gli abitanti il tempo è suono e aria, aspettano d'aprir bocca.
Oxford. Seated cross-legged, they ruffle a rainbow banner. Now it is raised above, they are inside it. Now they stand, ruffle again, and again are hidden under. Meanwhile, two lovers sit on the grass, talk and drink and kiss. She is blonde, he almost. Another perfect fit to summer in history, their painful happiness. And others lie and run in history's path. Elsewhere, a sphere conveyed one of century's games, and dust, smell of cooking. But love is the most enduring game. Those lovers in sun's shadow play it well. July 3rd, 2016, University Parks, Oxford.
Oxford. Seduti a gambe incrociate stropicciano uno stendardo color arcobaleno. Ora è stato innalzato, loro gli sono intorno. Ora stanno in piedi, stropicciano di nuovo e di nuovo si sono nascosti al di sotto. Nel frattempo due amanti siedono sull'erba, parlano, bevono, si baciano. Lei è bionda, lui quasi, un'altra perfetta combinazione con l'estate, nella storia, la loro dolorosa felicità, e altri giacciono e corrono sul sentiero della storia. Altrove, una sfera trasmessa, uno dei giochi del secolo, e polvere, odore di cucina. Ma l'amore è il gioco più duraturo. Quegli amanti, all'ombra del sole, lo praticano bene.
The next poem was written after attending a performance by the Hofesh Schechter Dance Company at BAM. Running, dancing. They are in sync, of course, but threes and twos are. They switch from frenetic leaping, twitching to shuffling, jazz stepping almost. There are folk dances as well. A sort of shuffle that breaks apart. One drags one across the stage. Then hyper-precise insect strikes. Endless club dances in reverie. The endless bothering of politicians is disrupted here in blissful dance, in communal joy of up, up. November 10th, 2017.
Correndo, ballando. Naturalmente sono sincronizzati, ma i tre e i due passano da salti frenetici e convulsioni allo stile shuffle, quasi un andamento jazz. Ci sono anche danze popolari, una sorta di shuffle che si interrompe. Uno trascina un altro sul palco, poi gli insetti super precisi colpiscono, interminabili balli da club in fantasticheria. Il fastidio senza fine dei politici si interrompe qui in una danza beata, nella gioia comune del su, su.
And this is the last poem we'll read, called Keys and Ripples, for Francesco and also for Audrey. There comes a time when everything clarifies. You open your eyes to the day, and you are seeing someone who is dead. So many departed, and only one begun. Here, where it is a new day, a surface is more than a surface. It is a support and way to see deeper and further detail the signals one sends. The body as a human landscape. The wedding ring is on the hook. Yoga extension into sky above home protected animals. Love is two people meeting face to face and heart to heart. The famous diver changes his mind. Halfway down, he doesn't want to anymore. Collections of materials, grants of superior intelligence, walking through the space between two minds, two hearts on Earth. That was July 1st, 2019.
Chiavi e increspature per Francesco. Arriva un momento in cui tutto si chiarisce. Apri gli occhi al giorno e stai vedendo qualcuno che è lì. Tanti partirono e solo uno cominciò. Qui, dove è nuovo un giorno, una superficie è più di una superficie, è un supporto, è un modo per vedere più profondamente, più dettagliatamente i segnali che si inviano. Il corpo come paesaggio umano, l'anello nuziale sul gancio, estensione yoga nel cielo sopra animali protetti in casa. L'amore all'incontro di due persone, faccia a faccia e cuore a cuore. Il famoso tuffatore cambia idea, a metà caduta, non vuole più. Collezioni di materiali, borse di studio, di intelligenza superiore, camminando nello spazio di mezzo, due menti, due cuori, sulla terra.
Thank you, Benedicta.
Thank you so much.
Translations.
Thanks for everything.
Well, that's the end of our presentation. So thank you everyone for coming. And I think maybe Anselm has a few words in closing.
Yeah, yeah, that was really great. Thank you both so much. And thank you, Andrei, Eileen, and Trace, for your readings from across the decades. The reading will be posted on the Brooklyn Rails YouTube channel in short time, and we encourage everybody to check it out and check out the archive of the readings and conversations that are there. Tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, please join us for a conversation with Rail fiction editor Will Chancellor and author Claire Massoud on the occasion of her new publication, A Dream Life. And you can now turn on your microphones and say goodbye as you check out of the cubes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vincent.
Congratulations, Vincent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Eileen.
Thank you for the book.
It was wonderful.
Benedicta, that was amazing translation.
Hi, Sarah.
Translation.
Hey, Benedicta, awesome. Hey, Fawn.
Thank you so much for having.
Thank you, Eileen.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Norma, hi.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent.
Thank you. Thanks for
Great book,
coming.
Vincent. Thank you, Trace.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Ciao.
Seeing also Nani Cagnone, Benedicta's father, Nani. Good to see you, and thank you for joining us. A fan of poetry.
Okay.
Ciao, ciao, Nani.
Yeah. But fascinating discussion about translation.
It certainly was, Andrei.
Oh,
And
Yeah.
fully read by Benedicta for sure.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy. Thank you so much for this wonderful afternoon. Thank you for organizing this.
No,
beautiful translation, just beautiful.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you for celebrating. Yeah, thank you, Benedicta, for celebrating Vincent's career and for bringing all these poems together like this.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And I mean, as you said in the beginning, this was really a wonderful journey. And it's something that I really feel privileged to have witnessed and have been able to translate. So it's been a real privilege for me, as is a privilege being here with you today. So thank you so much, everyone.
Grazie tante. Tutti.
Thank you, Benedicta.
Anche.
Tante grazie.
Grazie a voi.
Thank you all so much.
Ciao, Vincent. Thank you,
Ciao.
Eileen.
Ciao,
Ciao,
Fab.
Andrei.
Greg, good to see you.
Good to see you, Trace. Congratulations. And a presto.
See you a presto.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Grazie. Good luck.
Ciao.
Take care.
Arrivederci.
Ciao, everyone.
Ciao, Nanni.
Ciao. Ciao.
Piacere.
Ciao. Altrettanto. Grazie.
Thank you all so much. Stay safe, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Hello to Sarah, my collaborator on the opera, wonderful composer and viola virtuosa, Sarah Sarhandi from London. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Enjoy that music, yes.
Thanks, it's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks, Vincent.
Yeah, and thanks again, Brooklyn Rail, for another amazing event.
Brooklyn Rail.
Yes.
Really.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for
And for, you know, I'm less suspicious of translation now that I heard talk about the process. It's interesting too, because you are both translators, and you, Sextus Propertius, translated from the Latin. I wonder if any of that period overlapped somehow in the poems you translated.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, at one point, I thought I was Sextus Propertius. In fact, I did a show called Vincent Katz's Sextus Propertius, which was kind of fun at the Bowery Poetry Club. It started out where
Is that recorded anywhere?
I hope so. Yeah, no, I think we videoed it. It started out like I was in a drunken stupor. I was just at a table with papers on the table, and I waited for a long time. People would come in, and then eventually I just burst out of this and I started being Propertius. So he definitely influenced me. Propertio. Is he? I want to ask, actually, maybe you translate for me, Benedicta, but I wanted to ask Nani a question. If Propertio è un poeta importante per lui.
Properzio?
Sì.
Ok, sei un poeta importante per te, Nanni.
In verità, io vivo con i greci più che con i latini.
Okay.
Mi piace Lucrezio, in particolare dei latini, ma poi sono ovviamente amoroso di Eschilo, eccetera.
Okay.
Per me, insomma, dei filosofi greci.
Chiaro.
No, Properzio è molto interessante, però io dei latini rileggo soltanto Lucrezio.
Lucrezio, ok, va bene. E dei greci, quali sono vostri preferiti?
Ma io ho tradotto l'Agamemnon di Aeschylus e poi ho tradotto Periphysios di Parmenides. È un libro intitolato Parmenides Remastered. Ecco, perché è un libro ibrido molto strano in cui ci sono aforismi, inserti poetici, commenti e così via. E traduzione naturalmente. E poi ho tradotto Hopkins' The Record of the Deutschland. Sì, quella è un'impresa disperata, però insomma, poi ho fatto altre cose, ma
he translated Hopkins' The Wreck of the Deutschland into Italian.
L'ho tradotto 3 times perché non ero mai contento, satisfied, mai.
La traduzione è molto difficile. Aeschylus è tanto difficile, no? La poesia.
Sì. Però
non si sente più.
Sai, poi ognuno ha di idee sulla traduzione che sono anche complesse. Però la prima cosa per me è non parafrasare mai, perché quella è un'ingiuria per un poeta, è un'ingiuria.
Sono d'accordo totalmente.
E invece i
Never
traduttori...
paraphrase, he said in translation. Don't paraphrase. That's the death, I think, for translation when they try to make what we call a gloss. I think what happens is a lot of times, for Propertius, for example, other translations, the translator thinks, oh, this poetry is too strange, like it's too many erudite references, it's just too obscure, the syntax. So they try to help. That's what we were talking about earlier, Benedicta. The translator can have a role of an interpreter, sometimes to a negative degree, in my opinion, where they try to explain the poetry because they feel that the reader won't get it on their own. Instead of having notes, they do it within the translation. And I agree with what Nani's saying, is like, don't ever paraphrase.
Ciò che è oscuro in inglese deve restare oscuro in italiano o in francese.
Esattamente, perfetto, sì.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Obscurity is part of the poetry.
Sono feconde le oscurità.
Right.
It becomes difficult when you speak the language and you can read yourself in translation. That must terrify a translator. It certainly terrified my translators into Romanian because I was this shadow behind them, and
Their work,
yeah, that's true.
Tutte le lingue come se fossero lingue morte. Dead.
Sì.
Dead languages. Yeah. With every language.
I don't talk. Right. However, I am a hopeful listener.
An hopeful listener.
Yes. Well, I tried to speak some Latin. There was actually somebody in Rome who did Latin conversation, but I missed it. But I think it's actually useful if you do try to speak it a little bit, or you just get it from other languages such as Italian, or in my case, Portuguese, that I also speak. I suddenly realized that my Latin had improved because my Portuguese got better. And I went back to the Latin poetry. I was like, oh, this makes a lot more sense. Some of the colloquial quality to it, particularly in the Roman poets that I like, you could feel that a little bit more, like the rhythm of daily speech.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, we have some people who are not showing their faces down there, including Mazzoli. Quello è Emilio, signore Mazzoli, è qui. Mostra la faccia, per favore.
Show yourself.
And Ingrid is a good friend, and Rob and Lynn, but whatever, they're doing things. We all have the right inside. Well, we could go on all day.
Nice to gather, yeah.
Hey, Greg.
Hi, Andrei.
Great to see you. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.
Great.
Later. Ciao.
Not looking for that. I appreciate that.
Thanks again.
Great job.
Everyone.
Yes, thank you all so much.
We all have the right to do this while in bed, or.
Vincent, this arrived.
Oh, okay. I got one too. Yeah, that's
Okay,
Louise Hamlin's new catalog of her painting exhibition up at the Hood at Dartmouth.
Which Vincent has an essay in here.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Great.
Right. Well, thank you all. This has been a wonderful
Yes,
afternoon. I
this
really
has been
appreciate
such an honor. Thank you so much.
Be in touch. Hey, Anselm.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Anselm.
Greg.
Thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Nick, for guiding us through this and for organizing all the technical stuff and for your passion. Thanks.
It is my pleasure. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Nick, and everyone. Thanks, Anselm.
Thanks, Vincent, for
Oliver and
everything.
Carolyn, nice to meet you.
Well, stay safe. Yeah. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye.
We'll
Ciao.
hopefully see you all
Take
soon.
care.
Wow.
Bye.
Ciao.
Awesome.